Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm Sister B, and welcome to Islamic Audio Bites. I am absolutely thrilled to say Moazzam Begg of the organisation Cage will be narrating this episode for us. A British-born Muslim, Moazzam Begg was held as an enemy combatant in extrajudicial detention by the US government in Bagram and Guantanamo for nearly 3 years. Released without charge, he went on to become an author, public speaker, media commentator, and outreach director of Cage, a London-based advocacy organisation that aims to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. In 2019, he was included in the Muslim 500, a listing of the most influential Muslims in the world. Jazakallah khair, Brother Moazzam, for taking the time to read for us. Brother Moazzam Begg will be reading Ramadhan in Guantanamo, The Best of Times, which can be viewed at cage.ngo. So without further ado, let's read.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I first read the Dickens classic, Bleak House, in solitary confinement in Camp Echo in Guantanamo in 2004. The concentric part of this story is based on the fictitious, though accurately representative and never-ending case of Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, which ultimately consumes and destroys the lives of its central characters, rather like the Supreme Court decisions relating to the Guantanamo prisoners. But it was the first sentence of another Dickens classic, A Tale of Two Cities, which reads, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It captured my imagination back then." But that is precisely how I would describe the noble months of Ramadan spent in US captivity. It was the night before the festival of Eid al-Adha that I was sent from Pakistani custody into US custody at Kandahar in Afghanistan. After the brutal initiation of being processed like an animal and locked in a cage made of razor wire, I couldn't believe my ears when a visitor from the International Committee of the Red Cross was wandering around the cells with an army escort, handing out small pieces of meat and cold bread to prisoners, uttering the words, "Eid Mubarak." That was the first Eid my family ever spent without me. Another 5, both Eids of Al-Adha and Al-Fitr, were to pass before I saw them again. For most prisoners in Guantanamo, it is approaching 40 of these blessed days over a period of 20 years dwelling in cages. And still they pray for deliverance. However, the worst Ramadan I've ever had in my life was not in Guantanamo. That happened in Bagram, the US detention facility in Afghanistan. This was a place where already torture, humiliation, and degradation of prisoners regularly occurred. We were not allowed to talk. We were not allowed to walk or exercise without permission. We were not given access to natural light or dark. We had to guess prayer times and were not allowed to pray in Jama'ah congregation, or make the call to prayer, the adhan, or recite the Quran out loud. I had to make tayammum, dry ablution, for a year, and had forgotten how to make wudu, ablution, correctly by the time I arrived in Guantanamo, since water could only be used to drink, but not for wudu. Anyone failing to comply with these rules was unceremoniously dragged to the front of the cell, their wrists shackled to the top of the cage, and a black hood placed over the head. It happened to us all, sometimes for hours, and even days on end. When Ramadan came, I was already dreading it. I think we were all dreading it. There were no hot meals or drinks for us in Bagram. Fresh vegetables were a luxury we were not afforded. Fresh fruit was a rarity. There was none of the food we all so lovingly prepare and indulgently consume during this month of abstention in our homes. There were no snacks between meals or keeping food until later. Everything had to be handed back within 15 minutes, eaten or not. The meals, with small pre-packed sachets, the types used for campers, and sometimes a moldy piece of Afghan bread thrown in for good measure. There was no Taraweeh Ramadan night prayer, no Eid prayer. In fact, the Jummah, Friday congregational prayer, has not been performed by any of the Guantanamo prisoners for almost 2 decades. The prisoners in Bagram and Guantanamo shortened every prayer, not only as a mercy from Allah for travelers, but also as a refusal to accept any permanence of incarceration, even though that was and continues to be a looming reality in one way or another. It was a defiant rejection of imprisonment without trial or charge, a fact unnoticed and quite irrelevant to our captors. As if to punish us for the very arrival of Ramadan, we were given the two meals, the suhoor, pre-dawn meal, and iftar, sunset meal, receiving the latter often several hours after sunset. On the day of Eid al-Fitr, the festival marking the end of Ramadan, we did not feast and make merry like most of the Muslim world. Instead, we were made to fast from dawn to near midnight, when we were finally given a food sachet. One of the guards, a young female to whom I used to speak often about Islam, history, and literature, was appalled by this and gave me some of her own food, at real risk to herself. It is a gesture I will never forget, but she was a rarity. That was the worst of times, but it wasn't over. I spent the following Ramadan alone in solitary confinement. In truth, I dreaded the approach of this Ramadan too. I knew the outlook was bleak. I had to imagine how my family was passing this month and the festival that followed it. It is a month of blessing, extra prayer, sharing, inviting others to meals, a month of anticipating celebrations with family and friends, who, for me and many others, were both only a distant memory by then. I thought of all the Islamic rulings about fasting and how it all seemed rather immaterial here. In fact, I could not have fasted since I was shortening my prayer, hence I had the status of a traveller, albeit a coerced one. But I think fasting was a pronounced difference between us and them, an act of defiance too. After all, Ramadan is the month of the Quran and the month of the Battle of Badr, the most decisive struggle in the history of Islam. The concept of abstaining completely from food as well as drink from dawn to dusk was as alien to most burger eating, fries munching, Budweiser drinking Yanks as American justice was to us. Even the practicing Christian soldiers who sometimes read the Bible in front of me couldn't comprehend the fast of the Muslim was like the fast of the prophets, not the fast of Lent, during which some devotees choose to refrain from having mushrooms on their pizza as a personal sacrifice to the Almighty. I remember telling a guard that in fact he fasted every day, although his timings were different. The breakfast or breakfast meal every morning. He still didn't get it. After the passing of this Ramadan in seclusion, with no contact from another Muslim for close to 2 years, I was longing, praying, and agitating that the next one would be spent in the company of Muslims, even one Muslim. My prayer was finally answered, and thus my Ramadan and Eid were spent in the company of the world's most dangerous terrorists, according to President Bush, and the world's finest examples of patience and fortitude, according to me. Some guards ridiculed the adhan when the Muadzin's voice echoed around Guantanamo, particularly at sunset, when it clashed with the US national anthem that simultaneously rung out on loudspeakers. What followed was a daily reminder to us all about our, soldiers and prisoners, purpose in life. One group, the one dressed in khaki and camouflage, stopped in their tracks, stood in the direction of their flag, raised their hands, and saluted the object of their devotion, the US flag. The other group, the one dressed in orange, also stopped in their tracks, stood facing east and raised both their hands to salute the object of their devotion, the one God, the Lord of the worlds. During the day, despite the intense tropical Caribbean heat, we recited and memorized the Quran, had debates on any subject from medieval African history to Hubble's expanding universe theory, from the Islamic ruling on captives to the latest Western methods of capturing them. We exercised vigorously, a few of us far surpassing the physical capabilities of the full-time soldiers guarding us. Some of us controlled our anger and antipathy towards the guards during this month and offered smiles and kind words when the opposite would have been expected. That too was an act of defiance. The greatest defiance, to me at least, was wishing each other hani'an mari'an at iftar, bon appetit. It was also the spontaneous breaking out into anashid Islamic songs in Arabic, Urdu, Pashto, Farsi, Uyghur, Turkish, and yes, even English. It was a recitation of poetry and prose in verses that could not have been compiled anywhere on earth but Guantanamo, the prison of the enemy where captive prisoners were brought and made the first ever call to prayer. It was the individual calls of Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh ya Abdullah. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be with you, O servant of Allah, emanating from cell blocks containing invisible faces, faces that showered us with concern, hope, and love, even though we couldn't see them. But there was an act of defiance even more potent. It was more powerful than throwing liquid cocktails at the soldiers, stronger than lashing out with shackled hands towards them, or calling them himar, donkey, or khanzir, pig. Even stronger than the hunger strikes that nearly claimed the lives of many a brave man. It was the prayer and the dua supplication to Allah of the Imam reverberating alone amidst the chimes of razor wire rubbing against barbed wire impelled by a soft Caribbean breeze. It was the saying Ameen in unison to a prayer we all wanted answered. It was the tears we all shed in the knowledge that we each had a reason to weep. It was a sadness that was almost sweet. It was our ultimate symbol of defiance. It was the best of times.
That is it for this episode. Once again, thank you to Brother Moazzam Begg for narrating this episode for us. And thank you to you for listening. Please do remember to share this podcast with your family and friends. We are on all the major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, Deezer, and we are also on YouTube as a voice-only channel. And do remember to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen. Please do join our Islamic Audio Bites community on Facebook and Instagram, and also have a look at our website at islamicaudio.bytes.com. If you would like to contact us directly, please do so at islamicaudiobytes@gmail.com. As always, God willing, hope your day is full of goodness. Assalamu alaikum.